Greatness. Hold on. Allocating some resources. Here we are live. And we have a very special episode today. Thank you for coming back to the Canadian Bro Show. This is the first iteration of the Canadian Bro Show. My name is Paul Bale. I am the founder. And I'm just going to move this over. There we go. That's a lot better. And really happy to do episode 33. We have a very special guest. My name is Paul Bale. I'm founder, director, and host of the Canadian Bro Show. Episode 33, John Leister, the co-host
Hi.
with the most. And we have a very special guest and very old friend of over 4 decades, since late 70s, when I used to play basketball against this chap. And we used to go at it very hard. Not so much in grade 8, but as the years went on, it became a little bit more content. We went at it.
I don't know. I don't know what Lord Bing was called, but U Hill were the Hawks. Go Hawks.
Yeah, well, the Bing. I mean, you went there after they were the Gray Ghosts,
Ghosts.
and every time we played them, they were even more gray because we just destroyed them. I want to say welcome to our guest, and I'm going to give you just Stu. This is Stuart Shulman. I want to give him just a proper guess. I stole this from another episode on YouTube that he just did 13 days ago with Dr. Hassan.
Dr. Stephen Hassan, yes.
Hassan, yeah, and fantastic website. Really enjoyed the interview.
Author of a great book called The Cult of Trump.
Yes, as he had in the background, he had a few other books as well. But to have Stu with us today was. We didn't plan this, and he made himself available. He's in town. We'll talk about everything. I just want to tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Stuart Shulman, PhD, is a deep data and quantitative focused in quantitative studies, and a founding editor of the Journal of Information of Technology and Politics, and holds a PhD in American politics, and is currently the founder of CEO of...
Tough to say. It's a tough one. You want me to do it?
Textifier?
Yes.
Wrong. Sifter.
Sifter.
Technology and Sifter, and put them together.
Yes, and of course,
Sifter. They get a lot of work out of that X.
Oh, no doubt. But I mean, it's really cool. And software, business, and academic, and commercial business, and so on. And essentially, he could probably tell you better than I can. But it's really quite convoluted for those that don't know. And I won't do it justice on this introduction and let Stu speak for himself. The reason why he's here is because he made himself available. And Stu, tell us a little bit about how we met and what you remember back in the late 70s when you're at U Hill and I was at Kits. Johnny was at Kits as well. We went to the same high school.
Okay, well, obviously I don't remember much because I thought you went to Bing. So the little gray cells do decline over time. Maybe U Hill played Kits.
We did,
Bing, and that's what I'm remembering because
we played you because
he put up 30 plus on us, and that's how I know you, is you were just this little baller rat, beast fiend. Also pretty good at baseball. I may have seen you hit 4 out of 5 out of the park there for home runs and make it look like it was nothing. So I just remember you as an athlete and a competitor, and I don't think we had much of a social overlap at the time.
Not really.
Because I was probably in the woods doing naughty things. And so, that's how I remember you, as just somebody who was kind of a legend. And then Kid Speech, of course, where it get pretty busy by the middle of the day. But if you went down early enough and you were a young would-be baller, you could get into a couple of full-court games down at the beach. And I think you kind of owned that court. So I know you as the master of Kid Speech.
Well, I mean, that's where I learned the game, and I grew up in Kitsilano as my backyard, and we were all West Side guys. I met Johnny in 1972 in Kitsilano. He lived a block from me. And Stuart and all the U Hill boys, Stuart went to school at U Hill for the first 3 years, and I believe transferred over to...
I did
all five. All five, yeah.
I'm a Hawk, U Hill Hawk to the core.
So these guys were they played in an old hangar in the bush,
Yeah.
just
Hanger.
Yep.
yeah, in like an old hangar style gym, like
It
back
was
in
a
the
nice
Yeah.
gym.
50s.
And do you
Yeah,
remember our theme song? Our warm-up
I
song?
believe it. I believe it was the Super Tramp.
No, no, we're going to
The
talk
William
about that
Tell
later.
Overture.
It was. I'll give you a hint though. It was a Rolling Stones tune. It was played on a record player for every time the U Hill Hawks would come out. It was one of my favorite things when I was coming up.
I
Before I got to
can't
see.
get
No,
no.
no, no. Come on,
Nice try though, Charlie.
it's a key historical thing about U Hill Hawks. Sympathy for the devil. It would
Ah, there
come
we
out,
go.
boom, boom, bum, ba, da, bum, bum, boom, 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 and that was a rush in and
Hopefully,
of
we're not
itself.
violating any copyright infringements.
Not at all, not at all, because Stu is
It's on
legitimate
YouTube.
and he has all of this. And you know what? I remember playing them at U Hill because I knew all the U Hill guys. We all played basketball on the weekends. We played it at the deaf school at Jericho. We played at
Jericho.
Aberthal.
Yeah.
We played down at Kids Beach. I knew the Katz brothers. I knew the Schulmans. I knew
Yeah.
all the
Lock,
guys.
Lock
Jamie
Mark,
Alden,
Jamie
All
Alden,
knows everybody.
Pod
Carl Mark, Todd
Podlecki,
Leckie, yeah,
David Cubid,
yeah.
your coach David Harrison, great guy.
John Harrison, yeah,
John
yeah.
Harrison, sorry, he had like
Legend.
he was a white dude, had a 40-inch vertical that could
Oh, that guy
stand under
had
the.
springs. Yeah, he
You
had
had a
Oh
40
my
inch
springs.
what?
God, he
Man
had
could jump
ups.
through the roof
Yeah, it was
and
incredible. But
shoot. He had also touch. He could
yeah,
jump, hang, and float it.
and the reason why we played against U Hill because U
Blue
Hill
ball
was
lessons.
a smaller school in terms of the number of students,
Oh
and
yeah.
we were a larger school. We had about 2,000 students, but because we're on the west side and they were in like A, and then there was double B, and then double C or double A, double whatever. I can't remember. It's so long ago, but we'd still play against them, and they would play better than most AAA teams, and they were extremely competitive, and of course we got to know them outside high school and playing with them in those gyms I mentioned.
Yeah.
And for me, it was one of the most exciting games of the year. I love to play all the schools in high school, but I just love to beat up on U Hill, and we'd beat up on them, and I bust 40 on them without a 3-point line, and then give hugs to everyone and shake their hands and
Aw.
say, "Listen, thanks very much for allowing me to destroy you guys
Thanks for
once
allowing me to
again."
pummel you
Yeah.
senseless.
I think I remember seeing Carl Offmark put the hurt on you guys a couple
Oh
times.
yeah. Well, Lofmark was tough, man. He
Yeah,
was he
he
was
had
tough.
something there. He had
Yeah,
something.
and he was a very competitive dude and did not like to lose. As a matter of fact, none of you guys did, and you guys were very competitive. But at the end of the day, Stu's here
Hmm.
because in the title of this show is a Fleetwood Mac song that I asked Stu if he could just lend me a really good title that's something fitting for him. And Stu, you came up with this.
It's a slightly modified song because the song is Supertramp's "Take the Long Way Home."
Right, right.
So the title, I
We
think, is
definitely grew up liking the same music.
taking the long way home
Yeah.
because when I moved back to Vancouver in the month of probably August 2025, it will be almost 40 days, 40 years to the day from when I left Vancouver and moved to the States.
Wow.
Wow.
And because of recent events, I've chosen, and my father and mother have also chosen, to come back to the place that gave us a lot of inspiration, lifelong friends, some good basketball. Also used to play soccer on a gravel field as a goalkeeper and dive in the middle of the pouring rain on a 40 degree, I guess you don't call them 40 degrees up here, on a 3 centigrade day
Barometric, eh?
on the
Yeah.
gravel to make the diving save and come home every day with the bloody hips and the bloody knees. So it's great to be back in the land
Wow,
of
Stu, I had
gravel
no
soccer
idea.
field. Yeah,
I
I
had
know.
no. We share that. I was a goaltender. We won the BC championships in grade 10,
Oh,
and I
wow.
was a goaltender. And a quick story, you'll love this because it's exactly what happened. I can't believe you just said that. We're
Yeah,
playing Windermere in the
yeah,
semifinals
yeah,
in a crap gravel
yeah.
East Van, not Windermere, not
Hey, hey,
kids.
hey, not gravel all season.
Oh, it was brutal, man. You just get cut
BC.
up. So we're the favorites, and my friend who was also my photographer when I was in acting and modeling and stuff was the lead scorer and athlete of Windermere, and they really didn't have any athletic program whatsoever. He was probably the best in basketball and soccer. He had 4 goals in the first half on me, and he was running up to me and just rubbing it in my face, and I started to just sort of snap. And it was raining and it was cold and we're down 4-0, and the winner of this game goes to where the the Whitecaps used to play back in the 70s and 80s
Oh,
at Empire
Thunderbird
Stadium.
Stadium. Empire Stadium.
Empire Stadium.
Yeah.
Thunder's
No,
Thunders
we
at
had
UBC.
seasons tickets. We had seasons tickets. My dad and I in '79 when
There we go. And
they
we
did
used to
it.
go too because my big brother used to take me. So, anyways, his name's Gordon Dumka. He came up to me and he said one thing too many, and I just beat the shit out of him, and knocked him, and we just went at it, and I got kicked out of there. I got kicked
Yeah,
out of the
yeah.
game, of course, and I was so upset and so pumped that all the Greeks on our team, they said, Bale man, we got to do something, and came back and they scored 5 goals in the second half, and we
Oh, you
beat them
inspired them.
5-4.
You know, it reminds me of that famous saying. I went to a hockey game and a soccer fight broke out.
Yeah, what's with soccer and fighting? What the hell?
That's so funny.
Is that the saying? I don't know. I can't remember.
No, that's awesome. That's exactly the same. But listen, while we have you, Stu, this is great. Could you please give us this journey? You've coming full circle. Your parents as well. Could you give everybody a better introduction that I did in my writing? And my writing was chicken scratch, although it was pretty good. And could you just tell us a little bit about your background, your schooling, what you do, and what you have done, and in relation to the most recent interview, so people can tell, because it is absolutely fascinating.
Oh, I'd be happy to, and cut me off if it's too long of a story.
No, please just keep on going.
It actually transitioned from sports to actually thinking about learning and being a serious student and a scholar. It looked like this because I graduated high school at 17. I skipped the 6th grade because all my friends were a year older because of all the sports I played. Back then, you would play up if you were good enough to play up. And so that's why I skipped the 6th grade, because I had made friends with kids who were always a year older than me. So 17, I went to Arizona State University. Baseball was actually my foremost dream as a young athlete. I wanted to be a professional baseball player, which was pretty stupid when you're 5'10" and, from Canada. those two things kind of count against you. But I went to Arizona State University as a freshman, 17 years old. I tried to walk onto the baseball team. There were 400 other kids.
Oh, wow.
One of them made it. He happened to be in the dorm room next to me. I met this kid like the first night I was there. Went out to the basketball courts. I had my ball. The courts were lit up all night. I'm like, this is amazing. There's like 50 courts. They're lit up all night. I met this guy who was a big, strong guy, African-American athlete. We played one-on-one for hours. He was the one guy out of 400 who walked onto the team.
Wow.
And I went out to toss the ball at the walk-on tryouts, and the first guy who tossed me the ball hit my mitt so hard, I was like, I'm in the wrong place. I've never felt the fun, never,
Does it still hurt?
I had played pretty competitive baseball up here, but it doesn't still, thank God.
Okay, that's good.
Johnny, Stu is a very good athlete.
Resilient.
Back when being an all-rounder was athlete, and now as my son came up, soccer only, right? And actually, he played in the New England Revolution Academy and came out here.
John, you got to back up.
Paid to play the Whitecaps Academy, and the coach put him in. He was the U14 leader, captain of the U14, but the coach put him in the last 5 minutes of the U16 game, and he got a concussion. And so he came all the way up here to play soccer. I was so excited, and I saw my boy go down. I had to go to the medical tent with him. Anyway, so clearly baseball wasn't going to work out at Arizona State. Came back here, took a year off, went skiing in Europe with my buddy, who I was swimming in the pool with today, right before I came here, which is why I have a refreshed demeanor after last night, which was my 58th birthday, and all my best friends thought it was wise to put a bunch of tequila in my body, even though I hadn't drunk tequila in decades. And anyway, so skipping forward.
Start again.
After a year off of skiing in Europe, and I think a lot of Jägermeister in Europe too, I came back, got serious about school, went to Boston University. My father was a professor there. That allowed me to get a free education as a perk of him being a professor there. Yeah. And I studied political science and English. and in particular became inspired by books about the progressive era and the beginning of the 20th century in the United States and in England. I became kind of a history buff and a deep reader of books like The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad
Oh,
and
yeah.
Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which is a classic about by a muckraking journalist who wrote about many things like the meatpacking industry. But that book was about the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti, who were two anarchists who were, tried and executed, and people protested all around the world. So I got influenced by some amazing professors, one in particular named Howard Zinn, who wrote a book some of your listeners may be familiar with called A People's History of the United States. He's
Yeah.
considered the foremost.
Matt Damon's favorite book.
Yeah,
Yep.
he's considered the foremost progressive historian, and that book changed my life. I became friends with him. I saw his play open when I was in England in 1987 about Emma Goldman, a famous anarchist and women's rights activist, and it was fantastic. Howard had a huge influence on my life. Went to grad school at the University of Oregon. Started out working on an English PhD. Turns out you have to learn Old English, which is impossible.
Ye Old English.
No,
Yeah.
it's worse than that. It's more
Yeah.
like Eof Slog and the Knickday, right? Which is, that's about as much of Old English I learned. Something
That
about,
sounds like Old Irish
yeah, yeah.
or
So
Old Welsh.
I dropped out of that, and I'd always had a green thumb. I learned ever since I moved out to Oregon. Even working in my mom's garden as a kid, I had a green thumb, and so I took a year off and started farming on a friend's piece of land up at False Creek in Oregon, outside of Eugene, where I just dropped out of school, and I was politically active with ending wars in Central America and protesting things that pissed us off because we're progressives in Oregon, and like logging the old growth forests and things like that. I got involved with a lot of progressive activist groups, and eventually I went back to school after a few years as a certified organic farmer to study political science.
I read that you're a garlic enthusiast. So
I've been growing garlic every year since '89. I have
love garlic.
got about 1,500 bulbs in the ground, and one of my big challenges over the next 3 or 4 months is figuring out when I arrive in Canada with my freshly inspected Canada agriculture approved import, because if you're just going to eat it or give it to people, you don't have to get it inspected. But if you're going to plant it in the ground, it all has to be inspected. So
Yeah.
I'm literally
Oversight.
planning on showing up in Canada with 1,500 bulbs of freshly inspected garlic.
Is
And
that all?
I have no idea where I'm going to plant it. Like I'm looking at apartments at UEL, but I'm also trying to find a farmer.
Yeah.
Maybe you got some farmers watching your show where I could stick all this garlic. Anyway, so yeah, I'm a garlic enthusiast. I got the PhD in political science, but really as a political historian, which is what makes my story pretty weird. Like my data was not data as you would think of data these days. In 1998 and 99, what I was studying were old newspapers from the progressive era, archival documents from President Woodrow Wilson's, records in the National Archives. So my data was all like wrapped, shipped interlibrary loan, carefully take it out, look through every page of the old newspapers, photocopy the stuff I needed for my dissertation, and I wrote a 500-page dissertation about how the U.S. government got into lending money to farmers. And the only reason I mention that is because anybody who's ever bought a house, and I know you have a little real estate work on the side,
Yep.
or in the center of your life, I'm not clear which. I'm sure you're making clear over drinks tonight.
Oh, yeah.
But if you're familiar, and I'm sure you are, with the concept of amortization, the
Yes.
30-year loan, it did not exist in
Yes.
1915. It came into existence in 1916 with the passage of the Federal Farm Loan Act signed into law by Woodrow Wilson, because what it was the product of, and this is what my dissertation uncovered, was they spent years, these journalists, looking at what farmers and cooperatives did in Europe, and they brought this system of amortization, because before 1916, if you got a loan for anything, especially a farm, it was a 3 to 5 year or even a 1 year loan, and you were at the mercy of the bankers.
Yeah.
And so the government got involved in lending money to farmers in a more consistent way, and it ultimately led to homeowners being able to get mortgages for 30 years. But without the Federal Farm Loan Act, we'd all be over the barrel year on, year out for getting an interest rate on our loans. And so that's kind of how I got into um, my work with documents, archival documents, and old newspapers, old records. But that was a really bad professional choice, actually. The field in 1999, being a political historian was about, well, it just wasn't sexy. You couldn't sell that. Back then, in political science, there was a theory called rational choice theory. It's a style of research, a lot of game theory, experimentation, stuff that goes on in the lab, a lot of quantification and statistical evaluation of large.
You worked for the military, right? For the U.S. Secret Service?
I can say something about that. I didn't work for.
Do you have to kill me now? For
Well,
asking that question?
I don't know if we can share that, Johnny.
You worked for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I read on.
Well, there's a
which I find fascinating.
So you've gone to 2009 and 2020, but I'm still stuck back in where were we? Probably 5 or 10 years earlier, trying to connect the dots.
We'll keep the continuity.
So, coming out of grad school, I had no future. I was out there in the job market. Nobody wanted to hire me. I had a fresh PhD. And I went home to visit my mom and dad. And my dad was a professor. My mom was a lawyer and a law professor. And he says, well, let's go look on the Community of Science, which is like an internet-based repository. Again, this is 2000. Internet was a completely different thing back then. Of grants. You could go look for grants. And we found this thing called the Digital Government Program. And we learned about this funding source. It's the National Science Foundation. And I had this experience as a certified organic farmer. And right about this time, the government of the United States was trying to standardize what the word organic meant. And it had 50 different meanings in 50 different states. And the purpose of regulating it in a consistent way is so that if you grow organic stuff, it means the same thing in all 50 states. And so they proposed this rule. And again, I had been a certified organic farmer in Eugene, Oregon. And Oregon had the highest standard. It was called Oregon Tilth. And it was the gold standard of organic at the time. And they proposed this federal regulation. It included sewage sludge, genetically modified organisms, and things that, there was one third thing, the big three we called it, that organic farmers and consumers found obnoxious. They were corporate sort of things that were being put into the regulation. And so there was a massive outpouring. And so the USDA received 250,000 public comments, which in 1999, 2000 was kind of epic, almost record-breaking public input on a regulation, which is usually obscure and done out of the public view. And so I found this grant funder, and I went and saw the USDA people, and they gave me this zip disk. I don't know if you remember zip disks, but back then, or 50 or 100 megabytes of data on a disk. They gave me a zip disk with 20,000.
I remember floppy disks.
Public comments, It was the next thing after floppy. And so I had the grant. I got a grant, $30,000 from NSF.
Cool.
I was a funded researcher. I had the data. And my task was to explore the possibility of using software to sort through large numbers of public comments. And that's the transition point from being a historian and a political scientist to becoming an information scientist.
Cool.
Because I was, and it was, unexpected, unplanned. You never could have picked me. Somebody used to store all his files on the root drive of his C drive with no directories or so. I was not a computer literate historian. I was just a pen and paper qualitative researcher. So I had this money.
School.
You get the money. You go to the conferences, you meet some important people. So I met some of the most important computer scientists in the field who are also funded by this program. We went out for some beers. Turned out we all hit it off. We had a kind of, why don't we try and work together? Suddenly we're getting some big grants. We're talking about hundreds of thousands or even $1 million to develop a solution, and the problem was this. What happens if 1 million people submit comments to one agency and they have to read the comments in a statutory defined 90-day period and respond? And the law requires if somebody submits a meaningful comment, you you have to respond. And if you don't respond, you can be taken to court. And you go to court, you can spend years trying to promulgate this regulation to set the standards for organic or whatever it is, or pesticides, clean air, clean water, you name it. All of those things are defined through what we call regulatory rulemaking. So I started getting involved with lawyers and law professors, going to the American Bar Association meetings, being up there and presenting the data because we started getting data. This is what happened. The EPA gave us 500,000 public comments. Environmental Protection Agency. And back in 2003 or 2004, we were now established.
The brains of the outfit.
Yeah, there we go.
It's the toque, Johnny. It's a toque.
I thought about wearing a toque, but I'm glad I didn't. I'd be overheated by now. They gave us 500,000 public comments on the proposed standard for mercury in the air, which is a real hot button because it gets in the fish. People eat the fish. They get, affected by mercury. It's a really high stakes rulemaking. And so there were 500,000 public comments. I went to the EPA, and it took them 3 days to download 500,000 comments. But what we would do is we would store them in what was called a test bed. And that was at Carnegie Mellon University, which is a big top computer science school. And we made these data sets available to a wide variety of researchers. Anybody who wanted to download their public comments, they could get 500,000 of these or 250,000 of these and do research on them. We ended up developing software that would make it easier to find the ones that were exactly the same or almost the same. That's called duplicate detection and near duplicate detection. You've maybe heard of plagiarism detection software where students are, copying essays off the internet.
Gosh.
So that's the same thing. You basically convert all the words into numbers. You line all the numbers up and see where the patterns are. And then you come back with a measurement. Is it an identical or a near duplicate? And so we built that for the federal government in our lab.
Wow.
And it worked. And the government started giving us more money. And eventually there comes a point where they say, well, this isn't research anymore because you actually solved the problem. I'm like, okay, great. Now what?
You did your job too well.
Well, they're like, you can't have any more grants. I'm like, damn, those things were good.
Isn't that funny how you can be punished for being overly successful?
Well, no, I mean, logically, it would be, why don't you solve more problems?
Yeah.
Well,
that's in a world that makes sense.
That would have been a good idea to start a new topic. They did say, you're going to need a new topic, and this is where things got weird, because it was 2007, 2008, maybe 2008 at this point. They said, or you could get an SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Award, which is where the government gives you 150 grand and you start a business. And again, I'm a political historian, a political scientist. I got a literary background, literary research, English studies. I've never taken a business course in my life.
Wow.
I know nothing about running a business. And but they give me the 150 grand, and all of a sudden I think, I'm going to be the next Google. Right? Obviously.
Well, why not?
Why would they not? Why would they give me this 150 grand if I wasn't the chosen, entrepreneur to be the next Google? And I would benefited greatly from the work of a wonderful engineer who I'm still very connected to ever since 2007. One of the things about getting grants is you get a little bit off the top that goes to your research expenses. You can do anything you want with it. So I hired this amazing engineer. And we started building free open source software, and eventually we commercialized as a product called Discover Text, which is still online to this day, 15 years later.
I posted a link on my Facebook page.
Oh, great. And
I should have asked first.
We don't do a whole lot of work with the federal government anymore for reasons that are a completely separate ball of wax, having to do with who runs the government and what the role of regulations are going to be in the age of Elon Musk. But we basically help academics and sometimes corporations to sort through other kinds of large piles. So we've done tons of work with Twitter data and supported the study of Twitter, and still think it's important to study Twitter because of some of the things that are going on in American politics these days and with Elon Musk.
Yeah.
No time to look away. I would argue, as other people do, that when he spent $280 million to help elect President Trump, the second time, that was a drop in the bucket compared to the $44 billion he put down to buy Twitter which is the most important information warfare weapon
Holy moly.
on the face of the planet
24
right
billion.
now. And when he spent that money, which was not his money, it was other people's money, it was Russian oligarchs' money, it was Saudi money, it was basically every totalitarian, authoritarian government's money in the world to buy Twitter. It was to buy the most important information weapon on the face of the planet and to destroy Western democracy once and for all. And by golly,
call Jack Ryan.
It seems to be working. However, the one thing they
Jack
didn't
Bauer.
anticipate, I think, was that Mr. Musk would be such an absolute dick, right? And that everybody would immediately see, like, this guy is.
He thinks very highly of you, Stuart.
Yeah, no, we have yet to meet, and I hope we never do. I really hope he's not watching this.
Not as bad, apparently.
But, you know,
he's busy slashing everything in sight.
Well, the other thing is
Jason.
that as a student of American and English political history, the one thing I know is when you overreach, when you go too far, it actually inspires resistance, and there's always going to be a pushback.
And jealousy,
And
I feel.
Well, I think
And
jealousy
some of
is less important. Maybe some of the
A
Trump
little bit,
people
I
are
feel.
jealous.
Yeah.
But what's more important is the grassroots. And one of my most beloved American political figures is out there setting the gold standard for resistance. Bernie Sanders is on the stump. He's going from place to place. He's drawing huge crowds.
Oh, man.
There are people protesting in the streets against things are happening, and none of it is on the evening news because in our modern era, what we know as the mainstream news is not the mainstream news anymore. It doesn't, it's not Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather or whatever, Peter Jennings, right? It's a bunch of companies that are owned by far right or right wing corporate entities. They're not news organizations anymore. They're filtering systems to prevent citizens and democracies from understanding that we're under a direct authoritarian attack over a period of more than a decade by Putin and his ilk, who would like to see democracies, Western democracies, become so balkanized, so acrimonious, where everybody hates everybody so much that the thing breaks down. And the pinnacle of this is now watching Trump dismember a carefully assembled set of institutions that regulate things like whether airplanes land safely, or hit each other midair, or, whether or not grandma is going to be, taken care of because she contributed in her taxes her whole life to the Medicare and Medicaid system, and suddenly one guy who's insanely rich is going to come along and pull the plug on Granny's life support system. I mean, we're literally looking at one of the most brutal periods of American reckless capitalism, because all of those institutions were guardrails, not just for human well-being, but for the marketplace. If you're a capitalist and you like to have a stable business, you can't have interest rates go up and down. It's like the Federal Farm Loan. You need to know you could borrow, pay it off over 30 years, and have a fixed interest rate. Those kind of things help people make businesses or food cheap. I mean, when that law was passed, only thing they talked about in the press was the cost of living, going up, 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 up. This is the progressive era, 1912, 1913. So they passed some laws, a lot of laws, not just the Federal Farm Loan Act, to create stability in the marketplace so that you could know what to expect. So you could invest money or go to work or save up and know that when you were done, there was a predictable outcome. And what we're living through right now is a return to basically what existed more than 100 years ago, where nobody knew what to expect. Nobody could count on anything or anyone or any institution. It's basically survival of the fittest, and the fittest these days tend to be the billionaire class.
Yeah. Wow. You're not finished. That was just the intro, the first quarter.
I've never felt more like not the sharpest tool in the shed than right now.
Well, Johnny, you're not a politically motivated chap, and you've
It's not
often
that I don't
stated
care.
that.
I don't pay enough attention
Well,
to stuff.
this
apparently.
is why this show is so important, and I'm really glad that Stuart is taking the time out of his very busy schedule to share with information that people need to know, if they don't already know it, to be reminded of where we're at in the 21st century. And we're going back to the 19th century. When he talks about 100 years ago, this is a full-on assault of democracy. And Stuart, that was the first section. If you could continue on, tell me a little bit about the show that I just finished. Johnny and I both just finished watching 13 days ago on Dr. Hassan's, and it was absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Could you take it to the next level? Where you went from there and where you are now, or and how you came to that?
Sure. Well, it's it all starts in Canada, strangely enough.
Yeah.
Going back to 2019 and hearing about this, we were very established, analysts of Twitter data and collectors, archivers, and building models on it. And I started hearing about this Trudeau must go thing, hashtag Trudeau must go. So I went in and started collecting back when it was much easier to take in real time data for free. It was something called the public API, which meant that if you had the technical ability to connect to the API and submit a query, I submitted, the names of the four major candidates in the 2019 Canadian election, as well as the Trudeau must go, and got millions of tweets back.
What does API mean?
API is called as an application programming interface. It allows two computers to talk to each other without the human having to sit there and do a lot of clicking.
It's like that movie we talked about, the Colossus, the Forbin project.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Where the
it's
Russians
really about greasing the wheels for data to move from one place to another. So I say I want all the Trudeau must go tweets, and every 15 minutes the computer asks the Twitter computer, can we have more of those? And the Twitter computer's like, here's all these new tweets. And so every 15 minutes more tweets come in, and suddenly you're sitting on millions of tweets, and you start looking at it. And I started looking at it, and I think, this is weird. First weird thing I saw, having grown up in Canada, 16 of my first 18 years, and having earned a PhD in American politics, I was struck by the fact that there were so many people who said that they were American in their Twitter bio, but they were tweeting about the Canadian election. And I can tell you, maybe when Canada plays USA in hockey, or something, Americans are aware of Canada. But largely they are not. They don't pay much attention to Canada.
We're the attic of North America.
You are, let's
Some people
say,
feel that way.
Not widely spoken about. And so it was striking to me that there were a bunch of sort of MAGA loyalist Trump supporters who would be openly identifying as America first, kind of nationalist, Christian nationalists, these people I'm talking about, who occupy the right wing and the far right of Trump's space. And there seemed to be knowledgeable, they're not random, but knowledgeable about Canadian politics. And to me, that just seemed wrong. So I started writing blog posts back then. The blogs have been taken down long ago. People were threatening me. It was ugly and all that. But started writing right through the election. And as a part of doing this research, I started seeing things like where WWG1 WGA. What's that? Why is this hashtag showing up? Part of what our software does is allows us to see things that are very common and to see a list of all the common terms. You're like, or 2-term or 3-word combinations. You're like bigrams, trigrams. What is QAnon? I've never heard of this thing. In fact, most of the world had never heard of QAnon during the Canadian election. But you had let's say a shit ton of American QAnons who were really interested in Canada and sometimes occasionally tweet in Russian, or share RT or Russia Today, other propaganda, South Front, Veterans Today. These are like Russian propaganda or sites. So, over time you come to take a step back and think, okay, sure, some portion of these was agents of a hostile foreign power that's known to use Twitter as a weapon, right, to create fake accounts, to create bots, trolls, to do all these things, to pose as people. They use avatars as their profile picture, and they write these crazy bios. But basically, I found QAnon in the Canadian election. And the Canadian election went off. That ended. I'm like, okay, now what? It was coming up to the primaries. We start voting for our nominee for president in early January in New Hampshire and in the Iowa caucuses. So I'm like, okay, let me just start collecting some Biden data, because he was kind of considered the most likely front runner from the mainstream of the party. So let's just start collecting collections of 2, 3, 4, 5 million tweets that mention Biden late December into January of 2019, 2020. And sure enough, there's these QAnons all over the place. Because with my software, once you see something once, you can go find all the rest of the examples. And in qualitative research, we describe that as deep immersion. Like, okay, I want to see all the people who say, where we go one, we go all in their Twitter bio. And suddenly I'm looking at 100,000 Twitter accounts. I'm like, huh, that's weird. That's a lot of people putting this weird thing in their bio. And so I was sharing this information with people I knew and trusted. And one of them says, well, one of my students is in the Intel community. You should brief him. So I briefed that guy. And then the next thing I knew, I got invited, and I think this is something you referred to earlier, to do a briefing to something called the Strategic Multi-Layer Assessment, which is an independent, sort of defense-related, intel-related organization that brings in outside people to talk about open source public information in ways that can inform the intel community of the United States and the United Kingdom. So on February 12, 2020...
That's the Lord's work, I feel.
Well, on February 12, 2020,
protecting freedom.
I think I was presenting something that still hadn't really broken into the mainstream news yet. And the audience was the staff, not the actual staff of the Joint Chiefs, staff of the Joint Strategic Operations Command, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, the CIA, the FBI, the British intel people, 65 people on a web meeting that was unlike any. Again, I'm just a political historian and a qualitative researcher, and I've sort of stumbled into being a software guy and a data guy, but really I'm like a grassroots, knock on the door, activist, social justice guy, and I'm finding myself in front of people who report up to the highest levels of the American and British government about threats to the country.
Like environmental threats or military threats?
Well, the title of my talk was Hunting Bots and Trolls in a Game Environment.
So more cyber threats.
Cyber threats.
Gotcha.
And my working thesis is that Twitter is not a social media platform, it's a gaming platform. It's a place where people go to play a variety of games that aren't ostensibly described as games.
You mean more like manipulations?
I mean like they're competing to achieve goals that they can define themselves. So a simple one might be, I want to tell a compelling story, and I want other people to pick up on that story and add parts to it. And it becomes like a collaborative story writing where like you put out what scholars of this movement would call kind of breadcrumbs, right? So one of the earliest breadcrumbs in the QAnon movement was this hashtag follow the white rabbit. And there were all these memes about you're going down the rabbit hole, and the whole psychological operations, the Russian piece, and we could go back to 2017 in a second, really important side story. But the thing I found in 2019 and early 2020 was this blossoming online game where people all over the world were playing on Twitter something where getting likes or retweets or follows or growing your influence and being a storyteller and asking questions that caused people to seek the truth, to find the answers. A lot of this had to do with allusions to things that were, the deep state and things that were going on that only the citizen journalist could uncover. And so it was an invitation to come play, right? And the technical term for this I learned from a guy named Jim Stewartson. You can find him on Twitter. He explained what alternate reality games are to me. And this is the mechanism I'm describing. And so if you want to learn more about that, I say look up Jim Stewartson. What I taught Jim Stewartson was how Twitter works. And so back in the summer of 2020, we were talking a lot about could we build our own game? This was before I realized Twitter is the game.
Yeah.
Right? Could we build our own game to essentially undermine or destabilize the QAnon game? Right? Combat it, yeah, and create some sort of our own grassroots cyber defense. We didn't, and the whole thing broke down. Actually, we had a briefing of John Avalon, who's now in Congress, and Donnie O'Sullivan, who was the misinformation reporter for CNN, and their producer, and we laid the whole thing out in August of 2020, and the meeting went completely off the rails, and they said things like, we could never talk about this so close to the election. There's no way we're going to, lay this thesis out. And Jim kind of lost it, and the meeting sort of spiraled out of control. And that was the end of that. But the point was that I've over time continued to gather these tweets, these Twitter bios, to sort of see what happened to this movement, because I got frustrated. That was August 2020. We went into the election. Everything
Quick interjection, Stu. Wikipedia, for those that actually will look into this, that know nothing about what you're talking about, including Johnny and I for the most part.
Mostly me.
QAnon is a far-right American political conspiracy theory and political movement that originated in 3 years before what Stu's been talking about, 2017. QAnon centers on fabricated claims made by anonymous individual or individuals known as Q. Those claims have been relayed and developed by online communities and influencers. And so please go forward, Stu. This is fascinating.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is Wikipedia got most of that right, but the idea that it is American or originated is somewhat in dispute. And here's why. Let's go back. So let's go back to 2017. When Donald Trump was first elected, he picked for his national security advisor a man by the name of General Michael Flynn.
Yep.
General Michael Flynn. And within, I think, 4 or 5 weeks of Trump coming to office, Flynn had to quit or was fired because it came out that he'd been talking to the Russians in the transition period, which is a taboo no-no. You have to wait till you're actually the national security advisor before you start colluding with the Russians. So he went a little early. He lost his job. He was actually charged with some lying. He lied about it to the FBI, and he was facing charges and ended up pleading guilty. And what happened is on December 1st, 2017, Michael Flynn pleads guilty, and I put into my little Twitter machine, Flynn, give me all the tweets. So I collect over about 12 days, 2.3 million mentions of Flynn, and I don't do anything with them. Nothing. I never look at them. I never think about them. They're just sitting in my database, on my server. And then skip forward to 2019, 2020, and I suddenly know there's this thing going on with QAnon. It's an intel operation, domestic, hybrid, international, what Russians, Chinese, pretending to be Russians, whatever. We know a lot more. I go back and look at the Flynn data, right? And you go back and look at the Flynn data, and what you find, people tweeting about Flynn in 2017, in this corpus of 2.3 million tweets, knew way too much about QAnon. They propagated follow the white rabbit. They put all the QAnon buzzwords in. The people who became later identified as the early influencers of QAnon were all very active when nobody on the internet should have known anything about it. So that was red flag number one. Like, why 2 years or 2.5 years before the intel community of the US and the UK heard about it from me, did all of these people on Twitter who were tweeting about Flynn have things like follow the white rabbit, the truth will come out? They knew the whole narrative. And you have to ask yourself why, because the sequence of events looks like this. Flynn loses his job in February of 2017. In the summer of 2017, as I found something on Twitter, which is somebody saying, August 2017, Michael Flynn has a list of deep state pedophiles, which is the whole QAnon story. But the QAnon hasn't gone online yet. Not even on the fringe, places where it emerged before it hit Twitter. So somebody is saying, and there's an embedded tweet of a Roger Stone tweet, right? Roger Stone, is a political trickster going back to Nixon.
He's a class act.
Yeah, he's an unclass act, but Stone and Flynn.
Oh, that's what I meant.
Yeah. He are linked, and so here we have it's October 28th that's okay. When the that's a sign, right?
That was a sign. I was just going to say that.
It technically is a sign.
The sky is falling.
That's incredible, actually.
It's a falling sign.
That's incredible.
Which is a sign.
Yeah.
In fact, the whole language is a set of signs.
And it's part of the game that's being played right now.
So to
on to us.
skip forward in the timeline here, yes, because we're about to get
There's
to
a
the
microphone
tricky
here.
bit. When QAnon emerges
Now that I'm
Hey,
paranoid.
in
we
2017,
got 32 minutes. It's all good.
when QAnon emerges, nobody in the whole world knows anything about it except the people who are creating the mythology, right? Because alternate reality game is storytelling. It's storytelling online. Only a small number of people know about it, and they know it's connected to Flynn, right? And so when he pleads guilty on December 1st, I start collecting all this Flynn data. Well, it's about 5 weeks into the public history of QAnon. So still, it's years before the intel community knows anything about it, and there's this huge surge of tweets about Flynn in which there are many QAnons sort of debating what does this mean that Flynn has pled guilty. Is this part of the plan, right? Is he doing it because this is how we're going to reveal the deep state pedophiles, right? And so this is, for me, the kind of the big aha moment in the whole thing is that this guy Flynn, who was the first senior U.S. military guy invited inside the Kremlin for high-level briefing, something like 2013. He goes to dinner with Jill Stein at honoring Russia Today 2015. Sits at the table with Putin, obviously flown there, paid some sort of honorarium. So 2013, 2015, he's got deep ties to Russia. 2016, Trump is running for president. 2017, this giant information op emerges in the wake of him having to quit as the national security advisor for the United States. I mean, there's a series of things, events that happen where he's suddenly out of the government. He's facing charges, and October 28th, QAnon goes live. In my opinion, the man he was the head of cyber ops
Yeah.
for the U.S. government before he went to be Trump's national security advisor. QAnon is his op. He's the founder. And people debate who did it, who's the founder. There's all this. There's documentaries and stuff. It's all bullshit. It starts and ends with Roger Stone and Michael Flynn and their connections to Russia and Russia's intent to undermine the United States. And what's amazing is these QAnons are still active on Twitter today. Elon Musk lets anybody do anything they want. So I could go out and pull down 100,000 QAnons, in a morning's work and show you what they're up to, and I can tell you none of it is good.
Yeah.
No, and they're up here too, doing things. They're doing info ops in Canada. The next election in Canada will be defined by those kinds of information operations, and most of what people see will be algorithmically tailored to know if you're like transphobic or whatever your particular, weakness is ideologically, or
Kryptonite.
whatever your kryptonite is. Russia and Twitter will deliver it to you nonstop. Once you slow down on your scroll and look a little more closely at one thing, the algorithm shifts everything that direction based on the fact that you stop to look at a street fight or a basketball game or whatever it is. And if you stop to look at, the rabbit hole and you go down in it, that algorithm is designed to make you see nothing but that.
Wow.
I wanted to ask you, Stuart, about the Big Boulder Initiative.
Oh boy, that takes us back even further, I guess. That was something that was run by a company called GNIP, which was bought by Twitter in 2014. It was one of Twitter's biggest acquisitions. They were a data provider. They used to provide WordPress. At one point, they provided Facebook data, a whole bunch of different data sources, online data sources. They were an aggregator. My company was customer number 9 of GNIP, something I was proud of. And they ran this thing called the Big Boulder Conference, which was where they would bring all the platforms together and all of the entrepreneurs who were trying to build value on top of the data. It was all about making data flow more freely and allowing people to build successful products on top of it. And I became one of the members of an advisory group that grew out of that called the Big Boulder Initiative, and we set up a 501c6. I was on the board. I was the founding treasurer. I donated the first $1,000 to it. Twitter donated a $250,000, to it. And the goal of it was to promote those kinds of peaceful interactions between researchers, scholars, the big platforms, so that everybody could get along and do work together. And soon after Twitter bought GNIP, because this was the brainchild of the GNIP founder, the first planning meeting for the Big Boulder Initiative took place at the GNIP offices in Boulder, Colorado. But a couple of years later, once Twitter took over GNIP, it was Twitter's thing, and they kind of wound down. They're like, no, we're not doing this. We're not making the internet safe for academics to study what we're doing. We're actually going to take things there's a complicated history, but Big Boulder was a fantastic conference where he's really interesting and quite powerful people would come together every year.
Was there an open bar?
There was great food, open bar, and there was a great hike
Johnny loves beers to it.
I do too, and the beer was good, the food was good, and we would do the hike, on the second day of the conference up the big hills there around Boulder, and come back, and there'd be this great coffee and food waiting for you. And my God, I believe I made it to the top of the Big Boulder hike 6 out of 6 years, but I didn't always make it to breakfast.
Nice interjection, Johnny. And where do you want to take it from there after that interjection? You want to carry on with the Roger Stone stuff and heading into the next segment?
Well, maybe we'll just talk about the future. What does the future hold?
What are you most optimistic about, and what are you most pessimistic about?
Yeah, well, I'm optimistic about moving to Canada.
Okay.
Well, I've already noticed during this visit.
Even if it's harder with you in it, that's for sure.
Well, no, even if Canada's going to be annexed in the 51st state, is that a possibility, do you think?
So there's a lot of discussion in the United States about whether Donald Trump says these things as a bargaining position.
Always.
Whether it's just his free association.
That too.
Whether it slipped out. Like I saw a little clip, I don't know if it was AR or real, where he seemed to be sitting in his office admitting that they stole the 2024 election. So, you never know what's like that.
You never know when
that his team stole it, and that
but it's honestly it's like you said in the video that I watched, is the more he lies, the more that they think that these lies will be eventually the truth.
Yeah,
and it's black. It's like the Manchurian Candidate.
It's Manchurian Candidate. It's actually goes a little further back to the Nazi propaganda machine.
Of course,
you repeat it enough, and people will believe it, even if it's not true. So, I think what's important right now for me is that for everything I've learned, I know that I'm usually partly right with a heavy dose of like, oh no, I didn't quite get that right. Because the tendency is to try and look for something that explains everything. As social scientists would say, a parsimonious, it's a big word, parsimonious explanation.
I love that.
You explain a lot with a little. But in truth, like the Canadian election or QAnon or any of these things or Trump, there are actually a lot of contributing streams. Like even QAnon, there are whole subsets of people who are like star seeds and mystics and people who got into it who really aren't political people, but they sort of identified with certain threads that brought them into the rabbit hole. So I think in the context of where we are and where we're heading, I don't think Canada has any likelihood of being the 51st state.
No.
I honestly don't think that would help the Republicans. It would hurt them because it'd probably be one big vote it'd be one big blue state, right? With it wouldn't vote Trump way. I think it would
it'd
vote
be
against
center left for the most part.
Center left. So except for obviously a few notable exceptions. And,
yes.
And we won't get into that.
No.
So I don't think about that as one of his real threats. I'd be more concerned about the Greenland stuff. I think I could see him doing something rash, and he was very isolationist. He wasn't a guy who was going to take the army and go to another country and conquer it. That was really not his shtick. He's really more about breaking down the power of the United States rather than building up. So something's been happening here in his second term that we're all trying to wrap our heads around. And we're not really sure, like, if he's a real conqueror now who believes that you can use might to go out and just take whatever you want. or whether this is all part of the grift 2.0. And the grift is really just how deep can you get your hand into the cash register and how much can you scoop out? And and that's really what he's been doing all his life.
But I mean, absolutely, and he is a grifter, and he's a master grifter, and he's always been that way. But with the attack on all the Constitution of a democracy of America, the only thing that after watching this for the last, I don't know how many years. And at one point, believe it or not, I actually bought his book, The Art of the Deal, which he never wrote. It was a ghostwriter, but
Sure.
I only bought it because I was interested in real estate. I've been in real estate for 22 years. My grandmother was a real estate agent. My family's been in real estate. And I was just curious. And I thought because he had a show, I just didn't know. I was stupid. I was young, like many other people. I had no idea that this guy was the scam that he is. At the end of the day, the fact that 70 million people voted for this scam artist, this grifter, is quite shocking. But it's kind of like Canada's 40 million, and there's really only 28% of Canada that votes. Pretty much
Right.
the same as in the States. And doesn't that help all of the bots and all of this stuff that's going on
Yeah.
underlying so they can take over? And a lot of people are saying that he didn't actually win this latest debacle. It was the bots and Russia and all of this that they got in, and it was actually closer. Anyways, at the end of the day, he did win. We're 2 months in. It's a nightmare. It's going to get worse. Can we get can we get rid of this dude by the 25th Amendment? Is there
Let me
anything we can do?
let me just say something about what you just said because I think it's important if anybody's still listening
That happened in 24.
Yeah.
that they understand because one of my hats I wear, although no longer moving to Canada,
Right.
is that for the last 6 or 7 election cycles, and there are either there's the every 2 years, every 4 years, but there's also local stuff every year.
Yeah.
I've served with what's called an election warden. An election warden is the highest ranking official at a polling site. And so in the morning of election day, I show up and I swear in my clerk who keeps all the records and I plug in the Dominion voting machine, and make sure it's all zeroed out. I check all the compartments for straight,
Wow.
ballots. So I know a lot about the mechanics of how elections work.
Yeah.
Anybody who shows up to work on an election in the United States has to raise their hand and swear under penalty of the law that they're not going to cheat. And I can tell you now, having done this so many cycles, that they're mostly older people. They're people who believe in the sanctity of democracy and elections. And the most important thing that your people need to know about elections is to steal a single vote would require a conspiracy of strangers who face the punishment of law, do not know their collaborators before the day they enact their fiendish scheme. They meet them on that day and somehow form a cabal to steal a vote, which would require that the people who came in for the second shift are on the same page, even though all we do is hand off to the second shift. So essentially, the whole idea of stealing votes or a stolen election is a bald faced lie that can only be told by somebody who has never been an election worker.
Although they did try to do that exact same thing.
You can't. The point is,
Of course. Of
there's no way to execute it. There's no way to plan
But they
it.
tried to, and they got caught.
Who did?
Well, I mean, there was a group of people that were insiders, and they got caught. But because Trump's back in power, he just released all of them from whatever they are involved with.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. The point I'm trying to make is that election fraud would be impossible because of the mechanisms that are set up to ensure that it is done fairly.
Fair
And so
enough. But
even the machines like
yeah,
Dominion voting, there was a huge case. Fox News had to pay out $760 million to Dominion voting machines because they went on for weeks on Fox News between the election and the insurrection and said fraud, Dominion voting machines, fraud. And I did work on that. I actually worked on that case. Can't really talk about it.
yeah,
Can't
of
really
course,
say who I worked for, but
of
I can
course.
tell you this: the true story of the Dominion voting system debacle that cost Fox News $700 million has never been told in public, has never been told by the mainstream news. And when I look at it from afar now, I look at that and I say, Rupert Murdoch got his money's worth. Mm-hmm. That defamation suit and that huge payout, $750 million, he's earned that back hand over fist with the results it's produced, which again are things like widespread belief that election fraud is possible. It's not. Widespread belief that the machines can be rigged. They cannot. Widespread belief that Dominion voting machines are a Venezuelan scheme. They are not. You go down the list.
But this is the whole thing about the lies, Stu, about you tell that lie so many millions of times and people start to believe it because they're so stupid.
Here's the second half. The part that can be hijacked is not the actual recording of the vote. It's the information that the voters use to go in and cast their vote, to decide whether or not to vote, to decide how to vote, to think about the issues, what really matters. That's where the information warfare takes place. It's not inside the voting machines. It's not inside where the votes are counted. By the way, at the end of the day, we have an electronic record and we have a bunch of paper ballots and we count them. And if there's a one vote discrepancy between what's sitting there counted by hand and what's recorded electronically, we have to figure it out.
Well, hence the 61 lawsuits that Trump and his cronies filed, and they lost 60 of them. Yeah. So it's foolproof, pretty much. So what happens next, Stu? What is going on? We've got 15 minutes left or thereabouts. Like, what is going on next? Like, what haven't we discussed that you'd like to share in finishing this up? Well, and by the way, thank you for joining us because this is fascinating.
So
very educational, to say the least.
Democracy is always poised on a knife's edge. It's not
under assault.
It's always under assault. It's never not been under assault. So what we need to do is understand that we live in a rapidly evolving environment, information technology environment. People talk about deep fakes a lot, AI a lot. But in the end, in a democratic society, the most important thing people can do is talk to other people, deliberate, discuss, seek reliable sources. Like, for example, I'll name one I really like, Anne Applebaum. She used to be a New York Times columnist. I think she's with The Atlantic maybe now. She probably has podcasts. She's on Substack. Trusted people who can see through, the smoke screens that are out there, and they're everywhere, to provide not just accurate information, but a way of thinking about information in the context of where we are. And this was true when there was only the print press. This was true when there was radio. This was true when there were 3 TV stations. These things are constant. Where you get your information, how you evaluate it. I'm sitting here in a library. It's one of the preeminent institutions for literacy on the face of the planet.
We love libraries.
In fact, you might be surprised to know after everything I've said today that I'm going back to school.
I was just going to bring that up, actually.
So the future for me is, I have a 25-year-old PhD in political science, but in September 1st, I'll be in the master's program in library and information science at the University of British Columbia, going back to learn and hopefully someday teach some of the things that I know about digital, what we would call digital citizenship. And the only thing that's different between digital citizenship and citizenship is the digital piece. Citizenship has always required people pay attention, that they engage, that they discuss, that they deliberate, that they're willing to be reflective and question their own assumptions and how they came to form their beliefs, and whether anybody has been asking them to do things like, I don't know, carry the water for a foreign dictator in your own country. Like, figure out what skill set do I need to know whether I'm, Putin's puppet. Because unfortunately, a lot of us, and myself included, can only learn by making mistakes, right? By coming to the wrong conclusion, but having the skill set, whether it's digital or non-digital, to determine where it went wrong and where you could improve or sharpen your analysis. I thought that it was all bots and trolls 5 years ago, all Russians, right? And what I learned is no, actually, there is a transnational white nationalist movement where there are legitimate Canadians who are human beings, who are real people, who really like Trump and who put "Make Canada Great Again" and "Make America Great" in their Twitter bio. And they're not Russians, they're not bots, they're not trolls, they're citizens exercising a right. And you know
Right.
what? They're very good at it. They're
Yeah,
talented.
and they're very much in a vast majority when it comes to Canada. Trust me, he is not a well liked chap at all. I would say probably 85% of Canadians would not even think about the annexation, the whole thing. Canada is proud. Canadians are proud. The fact that you're coming back to Canada and your parents are coming back to Canada, and I think it's really important that we focus on how proud Canadians are and whatever that means to Canadians. Get out and vote. Your
Absolutely.
vote matters,
Yeah.
and don't sit back and be apathetic. If you want to smoke a joint, do it after you vote. It's
Great point.
It's a
or yeah, and often many Canadians will do it before because that's when they need to vote because they're so apathetic they just want to hang out
Unless
and
it's illegal where you're living, then
the
yeah,
I think it's a participatory process. If
yeah,
all you do is vote, it's better than people who don't vote at all. But if you're not putting in the time, there are other elements of civil society that make democracy function, such as nonprofit organizations or volunteer organizations that provide, meet the needs that can't be met by government, fill the
yeah,
gap. And sometimes those are information gaps, sometimes those are food gaps, sometimes those are shelter gaps. There's a lot of gaps out there that need to be filled. Literacy gaps. Again, we're here in a library. This
yeah,
is where people come to read books, to become
yeah.
more informed. I think it's a great pillar of, what free society is, that we believe information should be available, and librarians play an incredible role helping people to
right.
discern what's trustworthy from what might be less trustworthy. And
Just brilliantly said, and it's really interesting the full circle that you've come to, Stu, and sharing this story with us. It's really incredible, and of course getting your new masters and exactly what you're talking about, and before we finish up and go for some much needed bevies and a bite to eat at
Some
our
laughs.
favorite our favorite happy hour. I just want to say thank you very much for joining us, Stu. And would you consider coming back to this? We're a very small channel.
The saga continues.
Yes, if we could come back and talk about a little bit more about, um, the scholar side of you and all the projects that you're involved with, and anything you want to continue on from this, it would be fantastic at
well,
some
sure,
point.
I'd love to do that. And I'll tell you a couple of things you can expect to see. One
Please,
is there's a Canadian election coming up, and
yes,
you can expect that, assuming I have my software set up here in Canada and running, that I'll be collecting data and reporting out to the news
cool.
organizations and the academics about the opportunity to look for bots and trolls and authentic Canadians who are up to good and bad things on the internet.
Authentic
Nice.
And
Canadian.
then also as a student, I'll be further developing a new application, which is a kind of a gamification or a game-like version of our software called Trust Defender, which is designed to expose younger and younger people, college age, but maybe someday high school, into a scenario where they could play a 2 or 3 minute game, hopefully on their phone someday, and have a better sense of whether or not a piece of information is trustworthy, and to create maybe an ecosystem where young people are playing games that make them more information literate, but which produce information to a wider audience, including journalists, about what's going on in a place that we need to keep track of. And that's the last thing I'll say is a
Excellent.
lot of my academic friends have said, I'm not going to study Twitter because I don't like Elon Musk. And what I would say to them is, that's like, being on the brink of World War II and saying, "Well, I don't think we really need to look into this Nazism thing because I don't agree with it." It's like, no, you need to look at it even if it's unpleasant and you don't like it. It bears studying, especially since the election. This little, kinship between Trump and Musk. You can't look away now, even if you don't like what you see.
And Trump and the Russian psychopath, and you know what? And in Nazism, I believe he took over in 58 days, and obviously, I think the orange fellow down south is trying to figure out how he could do it.
Beat the
Um,
record. He wants to beat the
yeah,
record.
and that's not going to happen. But he certainly, it's really quite disconcerting to see what he's the attack of all levels, and the only thing really it seems to be holding us back is the last bastion, and that is the courts, which is quite frightening because if they don't acknowledge the courts, what happens next?
Well, yeah, they have to uphold the court decisions. There are glimmers of hope, Paul. There are glimmers. So,
Good.
for example,
Thank God, man. Thank God.
Amy Coney
Let's hear
Barrett
those.
is a very conservative Supreme Court justice. She came down on one ruling
Yeah,
with
yeah. That was
five
encouraging.
four 5-4 ruling. Instantly, the
Yeah,
entire MAGA base and the
yeah,
Trump base turns on her and
yeah.
says she's a DEI hire.
Oh, Jesus.
I mean, that's where we're at.
I know.
That's
I
where we're
know.
at. No, she was
Anyways,
hired. She was hired to eliminate the women's right to choose health
yeah,
care for their
yeah,
body. That's her.
yeah,
That was her credential. It wasn't that she was a woman. It was that
yeah,
she would overrule on Roe v. Wade.
yeah, of course. Wow.
Anyway, on a brighter
Stu.
note, I do think at
The
the
sun
end of
will
the
come
day,
out tomorrow.
the people in democracy have a chance to give some feedback, and there are emerging signs that when the next election comes around, these guys are going to get their asses kicked
Yeah. Well,
because
let's
nobody
hope.
likes them.
Let's hope so, Stu. That was the most invigorating hour and 20 minutes of my life.
My brain
Uh,
is exhausted.
no, it's incredible. It's time to go have some food, some cold beers, catch up, and have some
All right,
laughs,
all
and
right.
enjoy each other. And Johnny's got a book.
And
Stu,
I'm
we like to finish up our episodes with literary contributions, and Johnny loves puns. As silly and awful as many of them are, sometimes
ended
they
on a
hit.
note of levity, which
Well,
I
they
feel
some
could
yeah,
be
absolutely.
therapeutic right now.
So Johnny, who do you want? What do you want to share with?
Okay, I just got this at the library today. I'm a big fan of Tom Clancy-esque political thrillers.
We are a
Uh,
big fan. I love Tom Clancy.
that Dr. Stewart here was talking about. The Trident Deception by Rick Campbell. It's the first book in a series. I'm one chapter
It's
in,
Dr.
and
Schulman.
Dr. Shulman. Well, I said Dr. Stewart. I said his first name, like
Well,
Dr.
it's
Ruth,
close, Johnny. It's close.
like Dr. Ruth. Next,
It's actually how I'm greeted in Asia, but go on.
I think this is what happens. So that's the book I'm reading.
All right.
Are you reading a book, Paul?
Yes, I'm going to bring this up for Stu. This is called Lucky Me. It's done by Stan Stewartson, the head coach of Simon Fraser University. Rest in peace, Stan. Stan was one of my earlier mentors where I wanted to get into real estate. He was a very successful real estate, and I accepted a scholarship in 1988 to go to SFU with Jay Triano. He was my hero growing up and is in the NBA right now as associate head coach of Sacramento Kings. And Stan Stewartson, he actually mentioned me in this book.
Oh, sweet.
Um, yeah, in 1988, I was a 24, 25-year-old sophomore, and it was an absolute nightmare. Second worst decision I've ever made. But rest in peace, Stan. And I love Stan, and I love Stu, and I
I
love
have a book.
Johnny.
I have a book too.
Oh, what do you got? What do you got, Stu?
That you probably can't see it. London, the biography by my favorite author, Peter
Yeah,
Ackroyd. He writes about English history, and
cool.
this is the history of the city of London. He's also got one shorter called London Underground, which is about everything that's under the city of London.
Oh,
But I
cool.
also love his histories of the going back to when England was just footpaths,
Mm.
all the way through all the building up of the
Footpaths.
monarchy, and all
Wow.
the way up to the 19th centuries. Peter Ackroyd, one of the great historians.
Is he
Well,
related to
thanks.
Bale?
Thanks for that, Stu. That's really cool. We got about 2 minutes. Johnny, do you want to do your pun?
Yes. Okay. This is not really family friendly. This is like a PG-13 pun, I want to say. So anyone who's easily offended, you've been warned. Here we go.
Okay.
This is the most childish pun I've done yet, but I'm rolling the dice. I know a woman who has 12 breasts. That sounds strange, doesn't it? Thank you.
Oh my God.
Do you guys edit this?
No, actually, YouTube allows. We've only, I think, between me and you, Johnny doesn't swear often. I think I swore once. You swore once, but for the most part, it is an adult themed show, and we adhere to the strict YouTube.
Not always.
Yeah, and no, for the most part, and we are so far so good. We've done about 50 plus videos, but in the meantime, I just want to say thank you, everybody. This is not a live episode. It will be up in the next couple of days. I just wanted to say thanks to Dr. Stuart Shulman, and an old friend of decades. It's come back into my life, and I'm looking forward to spending a lot more time. And we're going to have him back when he's settled in Vancouver and UBC. And Johnny, always thank you. I'm going to see you guys very shortly. And again, this is the Canadian Bro Show. This is the first iteration of the Canadian Bro Show, all things Canadian with Pauly and Johnny. The second iteration is all basketball from the Hoop Junkies, Pauly and Rolly. And the third iteration, I'm in the final stages of getting my logo done, and it's going to be all Canadian real estate with Paul Bale and guests. And in the meantime, thank you very much for joining me. Stu, you're a rock star. Beers and food and whatever else. We'll see you shortly, gentlemen. And in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us. I'm gonna sign off right now.
Thanks, guys.
It's been the best hour and 22 minutes of my life
today.
Well, we haven't even started drinking yet.
So, no doubt. No, we will shortly. But thanks, everybody. We're ending the podcast. Peace, love, and happiness. Be kind out there. It's free. It's easy.
Set an example.
Love you all.